Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Reinvent Legal Business series and this session that we're going to have today with the always wonderful Warrick McLean. Hi, Warrick.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Terri.
This time we're going to be looking at making the best financial decisions in times of uncertainty. The session that we had yesterday will be available for you by podcast and webinar, so just want to mention that up front. And I'll remember to mention it again as well. So welcome back to those of you that were at the session yesterday. This, as you know, is a series, a webinar and podcast series from the Centre for Legal Innovation. I'm Terri Mottershead, the Executive Director of that centre, and I'll be your facilitator today. We're, as I said, looking again at the financial management side of your legal business. We're going to be chatting with Warrick for around about an hour, and we're going to be talking in particular not only what you need to have in front of you today as leaders and managers of law firms. We'll do that kind of briefly because it's a little bit of a recap of what we did yesterday. But also, and importantly, we're going to be looking at the sorts of tools you can use to plan for a changed and changing future, because change will be with us, I think, for quite some time. So with all of that said, welcome everyone and welcome Warrick.
Thanks, Terri.
I thought we would kind of kick off and do that by kind of a bit of a recap of yesterday. But as a law firm leader, what sort of data should you be looking at right now?
Well, I suppose there's a couple of key areas that I think is pretty important. And we touched on some of these yesterday in the session, but cash is obviously really important at the moment. And again, we spoke briefly yesterday about the difference between cash and profitability. And I think in times like this, cash is king. In terms of understanding sort of those lead indicators in the current economic climate, and I think for a period of time that we'll be in, obviously pulling out your budget is going to be really important, and we'll talk a bit more about that throughout the session today in terms of modelling and forecasting. I think the other key thing in terms of understanding how the business is tracking on a day-to-day basis is understanding the value of new matters coming through the door. And again, I suppose getting some trend lines and some benchmarks if you haven't done that analysis before in terms of understanding historically what comes through the door. And sometimes that's seasonal, and April's always an interesting month, Terri, in that you've got Easter, school holidays and Anzac Day. So, again, April's, it's always a bit of an interesting month historically. So that's certainly for our firm. Again, I think tracking your time recording and making sure that's going in consistently and regularly. And obviously for a firm like ours, we require that that's entered daily. And again, I think having a bit of a snapshot in terms of what leave entitlements you've got on your books at the moment, both from a long service leave and an annual leave perspective, and understanding, where that leave sits in terms of teams within a specific firm. I think the other thing is, and we'll touch on this a bit more in the session, but having a sort of a clear picture in terms of what areas of law you generate your revenue in, and ensuring that you've done some forecasting around what you see potentially the next 3 to 6 months being impacted on those particular areas of law. And, I'll pick on an easy one that, now that the government's announced that there's no auctions and there's no formal open homes, there's no private viewings, obviously the residential property market and the property market probably more widely will face tough times in the next couple of months ahead. So it's important to understand what percentage of revenue that your individual areas of law make up in terms of your total top line.
So we've touched on that planning and forecasting stuff, and I wanted to kind of walk us through two particular tools that I guess we can use, one being scenario planning and the other one being financial modelling. And I'm going to get you to step us through that, Warrick, because there's folks that will be very familiar with that and folks that won't be, and obviously ask you also for some practical examples with respect to each, and also the connection between the two. But let's kind of start with the scenario planning. How would you define that for folks that are coming new to it or have only used it a little bit?
I think in very simple terms, and Terri, and for those of you who've listened to me before, I'm pretty practical in terms of the way I approach things. So scenario planning is really understanding what pieces of the puzzle could come out to play over the next period of time. You have to define that period of time. In our world at Coleman Greig, really we're sort of taking three bites of the cherry, really, Terri. We're looking at sort of on a day-to-day basis, number one. Number two, we're doing some sort of shorter-term scenario planning between now and 30 June. And obviously because of the time of financial year we're in, we were starting to gear up for budgeting and planning anyway. So again, that scenario planning will come into play for next financial year's planning as well. It's really about trying to understand what's going to happen in your business in the future. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be 100% right. But again, I think it's really important that you have a think about potentially what your business might look like in the short to medium term, simply because, again, I've had it asked to me twice this morning, Warrick, how long do you think this is going to last for? And, in terms of the current health and economic crisis, my response is the PM has said 6 months. And again, we'll know more, I think, over the next 2 to 3 weeks. But again, I don't think this is going to end anytime soon. So again, you need to be looking from a time frame point of view in terms of that short to medium term. Again, this is just meant to be a tool, and I think it's important to document this stuff, Terri, because again, once you start documenting it, you kind of get a bit creative. And I know I was doing some work earlier in the week around this, and it's amazing sort of what angles you can take and what nuances I think you can bring up. But also I think sharing that with your key leadership team is important, because everyone will look at this through a different lens, and I think that's important to get input from a variety of people in your practice, because again, everyone will come at this slightly differently.
So the objective, if I'm hearing you correctly, is really to almost work out what your uncertainties are likely to be, and then kind of coming up with scenarios that allow you to start working out what the impacts and your responses are going to be. Is that a fair?
Yeah. In simple terms, and again, I think potentially you won't be able to think of every scenario. But I think it's important that, you sit down and think about this, because then if you do that planning, you can appropriately plan your response. And again, I think it's been, shown a bit with some firms in the industry. Those firms who've sort of slid into the working from home environment pretty easily probably had done this scenario planning in some form or fashion over the last 5 or 6 years. Those firms who have struggled to be able to accommodate that work from home scenario probably hadn't done much planning around it and went, we'll cross that bridge when we need to. But I think the current 3 weeks particularly has demonstrated that if you actually plan for this stuff, even if it doesn't happen, the ability to harness your practice to get to the end game quickly is a whole lot easier than if you haven't thought about this stuff at all.
So what's the process? Like, what's the stuff you start with, and what in particular you're looking at, and then what do you progress to, and then how does it come out in the wash? Can you just take us through? I know it's kind of somewhat tedious, but I think it's quite helpful to just understand how the process works.
And again, I'll just use sort of our environment to use as a bit of a case study. I think, some of the first things that we looked at was really getting a bit of a feel for, taking a punt on how long this is going to last. And if we're saying it's going to be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, I think that's important to have some time frames, because again, part of that is really then understanding how long this is going to interplay and impact your business. And most importantly, when we get to the financial modelling piece, is understanding how that's going to impact your cash flow. Again, I think the other key thing is looking at, and I know this is a financial session, but understanding some of the things that we've done in the last couple of weeks is taking a step back and going, okay, how is this going to impact our staff? And what have we got to do potentially to plan for some of that stuff and support them? So, I think one of the key things we're all working through at the moment is how do you manage a full-time job if you have one or two spouses at home working full-time, and particularly for those children who are younger, self-schooling those kids, and then juggling full-time jobs. Again, when you start thinking about that, how that interplays in terms of them dealing with their clients, etc., I think is really important.
So is that kind of identifying a series of kind of driving forces? I guess they're internal and external. So obviously at the moment there's the economy and there's the use of technology and what you're talking about as well. And then I guess looking at what you don't know, so what you're kind of planning for, what the uncertainties are. And what are you looking for in terms of those uncertainties? How are you identifying those?
Again, it probably goes back to that whole risk management piece in terms of trying to articulate your risks. Again, I think the key thing for us is really having a look at each particular area of law and each team and forecasting and doing some modelling around potentially what that might look like. So for some areas of law, there's the potential outcome is that there's going to be an uptick in work. So that's a great positive. In other areas of law that we operate in, potentially there's going to be a downturn. And again, understanding potentially what that might look like. And then again, overlaying your strategic plan and, for argument's sake, you might have had some particular areas of law that you don't practice in now, but you might want to practice in the future. And again, some of those areas of law that you might want to practice in the future are either going to be, winners or losers in the current climate. And if they're winners, maybe now might be the time to have a look at some opportunities about breathing some life into those prospective areas of law. So again, I think sometimes it's easy to get stuck into the doom and gloom and this is all going to be bad, but I also want to highlight that I think there's also some opportunity around some of those scenario planning processes in the current climate.
I imagine that there's an infinite number of scenarios as well that you could be planning for. So do you limit them? Do you choose a couple? Or, how does that work? Like how many scenarios should you be running at the one time in a way?
Yeah, look, I think it's we kind of do, particularly if I'm looking at, say, like a team perspective, we tend to, being, working for law firms, we tend to err on the side of caution and kind of go, yeah, when we look at the scenarios, we might be looking at, okay, well, there's a middle of the road approach, or there's a, it'll be, you would have heard this in industry before, Terri, worst case scenario. And again, I think if you peg it at that level in terms of worst case and middle of the road, sure, you can have plenty of other nuanced scenarios and, there might be different incarnations and different versions of that. But I think, ultimately, if you draw a line in the sand, as I said at the beginning, it doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but again, it's meant to be a bit of a guide. And again, that scenario planning gets you thinking about the risks, thinking about the opportunities, and understanding potentially what you need to implement sooner rather than later.
Do you have to choose one scenario and then run that all the way through, or should you be kind of looking at a couple at the one time? Because it's almost like, I guess, in very non-technical language, plan B, plan A, plan B, plan C, is it that?
Well, a great question, Terri, or it could be a combination of all of the above.
Absolutely, yeah.
And to be honest, the way we're looking at some, particularly because we break it down from an area of law perspective, we are looking at, a variety of all of the above, because simply you can't have one rule of thumb. If you've got a mixed practice, which many of us do, as I said there earlier, you're going to have some winners and you're going to have some losers. So I think part of the real challenge is those people that may only practice in very narrow areas of law, and they're either going to be a complete winner or potentially they're going to be disadvantaged in the current environment. So again, it's really understanding your practice, accepting that in most cases, one size doesn't fit necessarily all, but I think it's important that if you can break it down somewhat, particularly looking at it from practice perspective, that's important. The other thing that I think I touched on yesterday, Terri, which I think in these times we need to think about, is understanding where, from a staffing point of view, you can potentially get a bit creative in terms of that scenario planning. And again, I think that's also understanding where individuals within your firms, where their skill points are, and looking at whether you can, pull Mary and Bob from over here and drop them in here, understanding what skill sets individuals have, or potentially what interests that they've shown before in a particular area of law. Because again, I think if there's the opportunity to cross-fertilise and train staff in different areas of law rather than losing them, and again, I think that's also part of that scenario planning, because you've got to get a little bit creative with that stuff sometimes. And that also then means potentially taking out the personalities of those people involved. But I think now is a great time to do some of that stuff in terms of moving people around, because I think this is impacting everybody in society. And I think, most people are pretty supportive of their employer, and most people are, let's be honest, happy to have a job in the current climate. So I think for many individuals, they'll be happy to do what they can to maintain that and keep their employer happy. And if that means working in an area that they're traditionally not got excited about, but may have some great skill sets for, let's take that opportunity. So again, I think that scenario planning around the people piece. So you've got the financial piece, sure, but I think the people piece is a great opportunity as well.
It also underscores a number of really important points there as well, I think, Warrick, about, firstly, being open to discussing the implications of whatever scenario you've come up with. But also, I guess it would be very easy right now to focus almost exclusively on a doomsday scenario for the next few months, say to the end of the financial year. But it is being, not afraid to look down the line a bit and to have that longer timeline to be able to identify those opportunities just seems to be so critical as well. And I think also in what you were saying there, just staying true within these scenarios to your values. If your people are important, then the first thing you're going to go to is seeing if you can retrain them and retain them. Is all of that a fair comment as well?
And again, so true, Terri. And I think the other thing is about thinking creatively around those scenarios when you come to your people. And that may not necessarily mean about cross-fertilisation of teams. It's been quite interesting. Obviously, there's been a fair bit of media, particularly in the last week, and firms, accounting firms, law firms, doing what they've been doing in terms of announcements. And again, I was speaking to a managing partner yesterday from an accounting firm, and interestingly, they've gone to some of their senior staff and said, right, if you want to take a 1 to 4 month leave without pay scenario, we'll pay you a minimum amount, but you then welcome back after that point in time. And he said, Warrick, it's been really quite interesting. The amount of people have put their hand up and shown some real interest in going down that path. And I said, oh, why? And he said, again, part of the challenge is a lot of these people have kids, they're homeschooling their kids, and it's really difficult. If they've been given the flexibility to take some time off, be paid a token amount and have the financial means to be able to do it, they're going to grab that opportunity. So again, that kind of thinking differently, I think people, particularly on this webinar, should be attuned to understand what's happening in the marketplace, and be across some of those news articles in places like the AFR and the industry media to get a feel for what other firms are doing. Because again, going back to my earlier comment, there's traditional ways of dealing with your talent in terms of different scenarios, but I think this current environment is going to throw up a whole other different ways of looking at things, and potentially you might pick up some other ideas in terms of how to deal with your staff and your talent management during this crisis. Because again, I think, and I mentioned this yesterday, there'll be some long memories from the way in which you manage your staff through this current climate over the next 3 to 6 months. And if you can treat your staff well, I think they're going to pay you back in spades in terms of loyalty.
I mean, putting my innovator's hat on and listening to what you're saying, it also seems to me that when we're thinking about all of this, it should be bringing to the front of our mind the opportunity for experimentation. And, with the parameters, if you like, being, again, now putting on another hat, the design thinking hat with your customers and your clients and your staff in mind, whatever the particular user is, but really looking at how you could do something, as you said, quite differently, giving it a go, seeing if it works, getting that feedback and making the change. And it might be an opportunity, to use your term, an opportunity out of a challenge, right, to be able to really do things quite differently. Do you think we're in that time as well, and that opportunity comes by doing these things like scenario planning, and we're going to talk about financial modelling in just a second?
Yeah, look, I think, I always say don't waste a good crisis. And again, I think the current environment really lends itself, and I kind of get, I'm a bit crazy like that. I get excited by situations like this because you can do things that I don't think in a normal world that sometimes is a bit challenged to get through. And, I work for a great progressive firm, but even, sometimes in terms of doing the stuff that we've been able to do in the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about doing some of that stuff for 3 years. So, it's amazing when you're forced into a corner and everybody's in that corner, everyone pulls together and get stuff done.
Yeah.
So again, I think, that whole scenario planning piece, and again, involving a number of your leadership team within your firm, I think is really important. And again, I encourage people to get their creative people involved. I think, in legal, which goes back a little bit about your design thinking, Terri, I think, lawyers, there are so many creative lawyers out there. And again, I think if you get them involved in some of this discussion at appropriate levels, they will come at stuff differently. But at the very least, I think you should be staying across the media and understanding what other firms are doing, because, again, some of the larger firms are looking at this more creatively. And again, I think, staff, most importantly, are willing to give some of this stuff a crack, because it's all uncharted territory. Most parents didn't sign up for homeschooling, and that's the situation that they're in. And potentially, again, who knows how long this is going to go for? They could be in that for term 2, term 3. So again, if from an employer point of view we can create some opportunities to think differently, I think that will be well received.
We've got to keep the doors open, so we've got to turn to financial modelling now, right? Because we do need the money coming in. What is financial modelling? Again, with a quick definition.
Yeah, look, and again, I don't think we need to get too overly complicated about this, but again, obviously, most of us would operate in the world of a budget, and it's really applying some of that scenario planning across the budget. In very simple terms, what we did 3 weeks ago, I said to my financial controller, she said, how are we going to work through for the balance of the year? I think we're week 1, week 2 into March, and we're doing February accounts. And I said, Kerry, let's do a 12.5% reduction in revenue. So it was fairly early on in the piece. And interestingly, there was some stats come out the next day, because a couple of my partners asked at Warrick, where did you get the 12.5% from? And luckily there was a survey that came out the next day, because to be honest, I can't put my finger up in the air. Yep, 12.5%. But there was a survey come out the next day, which had surveyed nearly 1,000 small and medium businesses in New South Wales. And interestingly, the amazing stat that they came back with was, they were forecasting a 12.5% reduction. But that was 3 weeks ago, and as we know, the world has moved quite rapidly since then. So again, at a very simple level, Terri, what we've done is by the end of week 3 in March, we had basically done some forecasting in terms of just purely revenue only, and looking at a reduction of that 12.5%, 20%, 30%, 40%. And again, 40% for us is probably a worst case scenario. But again, it kind of gave us that focus around, okay, and we hadn't even looked at expenses. So we're going through that process now of doing some forecasting around the expense line. But probably most important that if people that are tuning into this webcast focus in on is, at the very least, do some of that forecasting around your top line. And again, that also links back to some of that scenario planning that we spoke about earlier, Terri, in that ultimately for most of us, we've probably got some income broken down in terms of practice area types. And again, if you apply that scenario planning to that forecasting, that'll give you a reasonable basis for putting some meat around that financial forecasting.
Because you definitely can't divorce the two. I mean, obviously you're doing your financial modelling around what you think the scenario is going to be, right? So Warrick, to what extent, because there will be folks with us today that may come from a single practice area but a multitude of practice areas. And I know that you've kind of got to have an eye to what the economy is doing generally, which is clearly what you folks were doing. But if you were very heavily weighted, let's say you had a very big practice area, significant amount of your income came from something like the travel industry, would you then be, turning your mind to that as well in terms of how you choose the percentages, if you like, that you're playing with in terms of the modelling?
Yeah, so that's going to be a bit of an overlay. So, interestingly, part of that piece we did when we were looking at the revenue was understanding what industries were being impacted and then doing some quick analysis. And it wasn't, I'll be honest, it wasn't super detailed, but it was a quick run across the eye of going, okay, these are the key clients for that particular practice area. And for those of us who sort of work with this stuff on a day-to-day basis, you kind of have a reasonable feel for it. But obviously anyone in retail and hospitality smashed. So really, that was also some discussions that we had with the relevant team leaders in those particular teams to go, okay, we're forecasting, that client, is that correct? But then interestingly, you were surprising in terms of clients being able to pivot quite quickly in terms of they might have been negatively impacted, in week 1, but then by week 3, they're up and running in either a similar venture but delivering the service or product in a different way, or for that matter, completely pivoting and in some instances now producing content for the PPE type equipment for governments, etc. So again, it's really about having an eye to what industries you tend to operate in and being attuned to potentially what your clients are up to. I think the challenge will be, so that's for the here and now, the challenge will be how that's all going to trickle down in the economy over the next 3 to 6 months. So again, that's sort of the great unknown. And again, when we're looking at forecasting, we talk about worst case scenario, that's why we've kind of taken a couple of bites at the cherry. Because again, I think if you do that revenue forecasting, that then interplays into your cash flow modelling. And that cash flow modelling is really important because you kind of got to understand how long your cash is going to last for. Do you need a top up of capital? How are you going to manage that cash? Because again, going back to the beginning of this session, cash is going to be king.
But also from what you're saying, because the situation at the moment is, I hate to use this word because it's been so overused, but it is unprecedented, that it's a very dynamic and volatile situation. So you can't just do your financial modelling, today and then forget about it for another 6 months. It sounds like it's something that's got to be front of mind for quite some time regularly.
Excel is our, best friend at the moment because again, you've got to be able to tweak those numbers on a constant basis. And I think, this is health and hygiene in terms of finance and cash in these times, takes, priority. I think when times are good, you kind of not set and forget, but, things tick over and you get your financials at the end of the month and everything looks pretty good. Whereas, situations and times like this, I think it is really a day-by-day focus. And I think if you've got that front of mind, and for some practitioners that is really something that they get uncomfortable with because that's something traditionally they don't normally do. But as you said, these times are unprecedented, and I think, the firms that are going to come out of this stronger and better are those firms who've got an eye to cash and cash flow, and an eye to that forecasting and that scenario planning.
So, it can be done, as you say, with an Excel spreadsheet, but you do need to know what you're doing, because I would not be the best person to be operating the Excel spreadsheet, let me tell you. But I think some of the practice management software folks should also check to see whether or not there's some capabilities within that as well. Yeah,
no, definitely. And I think in some of those practice management software systems, they do allow that flexibility. I had seen on an Altmar post last week that a provider that, and I hadn't come across that person before, but provider to the industry provides a cash flow tool. So Altmar would be the best people to contact in terms of if you needed a lead on that. So again, I think there's plenty of either within your own practice management system, either with Excel or for obviously having a look at these tools, there's plenty of opportunities for content out there. I think the other interesting thing though, Terri, is if you're one of those practitioners or people that haven't necessarily got a great eye for detail in terms of Excel or don't get excited by Microsoft Excel, most of my team at Coleman Greig kind of look at Kerry and I and go, oh my God, Microsoft Excel, that's the last thing I want to know. I think it's really important then to not try and learn from scratch, but spend some time and spend some money and engage with either your bookkeeper or your external accountant to sit you down and work through some of this stuff. Because again, I think, you've got to be on the front foot, and if you need to go and tap on your bank's door to get some assistance from a cash flow point of view, and that might be, extending your overdraft or taking on some more borrowings, I think the sooner you do that stuff, the better it is. And again, I think getting on top of those finances and those cash flow forecasts along with the budget projections indicates to people like your relationship manager at the bank that you're on top of this stuff, and it's not, actually I've only got a week's worth of cash left. Even in the current climate, I think it's really important. The banks probably are going to be listening with a sympathetic ear, but they've still got their risk managers in the background running the numbers, and they'll still only want to look after those clients that they've got some surety around.
And to me, that's the thing that's coming through the loudest, whether it's scenario planning, whether it's financial modelling, it's really placing you in a position to be proactive and to take action early versus waiting for the worst case scenario to actually materialise and not know that it's coming down the pipeline. Is that kind of the message to really make here?
Yeah, and I think, in very simple terms, knowledge is power, Terri.
Yeah.
And if you've got that knowledge, and as you said, for some of us, we might have a Mack truck coming down the road head on for us. But if we know about that rather than stick our head in the sand and not worry about it, again, I think it's important that, we're on top of that. And if you're proactively having those conversations with your service providers, that conversation around extra funding, etc., or on the flip side, making some difficult decisions internally, knowledge is power.
And that difficult decision may even be to the point of closing your doors, but at least you're doing that with a strategy and a focus to get it done as well as you can, I guess.
And it might be, letting staff go. It might be standing staff down. It might be, telling people to, use up all their leave. Again, in terms of the scenario planning bit, there's a whole heap of creativity that you can get in terms of how you're going to manage and retain your staff if that's what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me turn now to just almost like a quick checklist of what the tipping points or the red flags or I guess the lead indicators might be that you should be focusing on to right now in terms of being able to make helpful decisions. What would they be?
Yeah, so cash, again, be on top of your cash. As I said yesterday, it's really about making it easy for clients to pay you and ensuring that your bank reconciliations are done daily. The other thing which, to be honest, I didn't touch on yesterday is, and I know some firms I've worked in previously, the finance team are always really good at paying their outgoings, creditors, etc., probably ahead of time. So again, just ensure that you're managing the payments of your business, not necessarily blowing time out in terms of when you make those payments, but within terms. And again, sometimes that for some of your key expense line items, that might be going in and having a conversation with those service providers to say, hey, can we extend it to 28 days, etc. New matter openings, I think that's got to be key, and depending on how good your firm is around that, again, most practice management software systems have reporting around that. So again, I'd be looking at that daily and getting that information out and having a look at that for the last 7 months, 8 months to get a bit of a trend. Again, April will be interesting. I think there would have been March for many firms would have been busy just simply because depending on what area you operate in, there would have been a lot of activity. Our employment law team, for argument's sake, were just crazy busy just because simply everyone wanted information in relation to that. So again, April's going to be an interesting month, as I said, with school holidays and Anzac Day thrown into the mix. And again, just get on top of your time recording. Be fanatical about that because again, I think that's really important. And probably the fifth thing, Terri, is managing your WIP. I had this conversation with some of my team members this morning. I'm never a big fan of WIP vaporware, as I call it. Sometimes, we're pretty good at putting down WIP, but how much of that WIP is actually recoverable? And again, when you go and have conversations with the bank, they're always going to look at your lockup days. So ensure that you go through your WIP with a fine-tooth comb, and if you can't bill it, get rid of it, write it off. Because again, you can't collect WIP. You can collect your bills, but you can't collect your WIP. So again, make sure what you've got on the slate is real.
I just want to marry two thoughts there that kind of occurred to me as you were speaking, that a lot of law firms at the moment are quite rightly and quite appropriately extending payment plans to their clients. But of course, when they extend those plans to their clients, they need to be looking at a comparable extension, as you quite rightly pointed out, with their own suppliers. Otherwise, very quickly that cash flow could dry up and it's not ever going to work or marry with when they've got to find the money for their own suppliers.
Yeah, look, I kind of take a different approach, Terri. I think, and we saw this during the GFC, we all said cash was going to tighten, we need to be on top of that. I think, ultimately, those people who've listened to me before will know I'm quite passionate about that whole lock-up piece and ensuring you get paid in a timely manner when you do the work. I think in the current climate, you're going to have those clients who you're happy to support, but again, they've got to understand that you're running a business as well. Again, I think it's also important that, particularly if you're taking on new work and new clients, you manage those expectations up front. And I think the third thing, really important thing, is make sure, again, when I was talking about WIP and vaporware and bills, make sure your team are billing in a timely manner. Don't leave bills to the end of month. Do it as you go. Do as you complete the work. Again, I think that's important. Clients will want to know in terms of getting it into their systems as quickly as possible. It's going to be really important. And again, everyone's going to be in the same boat around the cash piece. So again, I wouldn't be afraid to have those conversations about getting paid in a timely manner.
I wanted to, at this point, invite people to submit any questions that they would like to, but ask you a question that may seem a little bit left field, Warrick, but we've spoken, for example, about, making sure when you're making your financial decisions, you're focusing on cash, you're focusing on staff, focusing on premises is one of the things we spoke about yesterday as well. But I wanted to also just get your thoughts on to what extent should you or how should you be thinking about spending money on tech at the moment? And I'm thinking beyond the immediate and obvious, which is you've got to get people to set up at home, or tech and particularly changes that are taking place in the market. But the other one that's come up a lot in our conversations with folks is that question of whether or not it's a good financial decision to be spending money on business development and marketing right now. Mm. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on those two things, the tech and the business development and marketing aspects.
So I think in terms of the tech piece, if you've got that on your roadmap, I'd strongly encourage, particularly after you've done that scenario planning and that cash flow forecasting and budget modelling, if you're going to come out at the end of this okay, battered and bruised, but okay, I would like to think that the tech is still something that you'd commit to. And again, there's different ways to skin the cat, Terri. So, we've just, interestingly, I signed off a fortnight ago on a reasonably large project for us. Now, we had to sort of renegotiate that project in terms of we still want to do it, we're still committed to it, but we managed to work through with the suppliers a bit of get out of jail card if for whatever reason the worst case scenario happened and we couldn't proceed with it. Now the vendors and the suppliers were totally understanding when I went back to them because we had sort of been not stalling, but we were just sort of trying to get our ducks in a row. So again, I think the vendors in the current market are really understanding. They're in the same position as well. And again, I think you'll find that interestingly to try and negotiate now is probably a great time to actually do that with the vendors. And they're trying to get deals over the line. So again, I think if you can build in some flexibility to those projects, don't put stuff on a complete hold. If you're obviously scenario planning and your financial forecast suggests that you're going to be reasonably okay. In terms of the BD and marketing, yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm a strong believer, which kind of goes against probably most accountants' processes, but I'm always a strong believer of the marketing and BD at times like this. And again, I think probably the key thing to focus in on is your actual clients rather than new business. I think, you got to stay close to your clients. You've got to be understanding how your clients are positioning themselves. Interestingly, from an accountant's perspective, the accountants out there are going to get smashed with all the stimulus packages, etc. So they're going to be very, very close to their clients. And I think for us, though, there's certainly ways and means of engaging with our client base. And it's something as simple as, literally just picking up the phone, ensuring that for those clients you haven't heard from, that you are engaging with them and having conversations with them. So again, that doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money, Terri. Again, I think the whole content piece, I think a lot of firms have got on that. And again, there's a swathe of information about there, about COVID-19 and then what's available out there for clients. But again, I think probably the key thing for any firm is to look after those existing clients and make sure that they remain close and sticky.
With the tech piece, Warrick, if I can just go back to that for a second, I guess that if it is being factored into particularly the scenario planning and, of course, the financial modelling, but that really it's helping you then to look at the different ways that you might be practicing now, and I guess really, really focusing on those efficiencies and effectiveness of using technology. So it seems like that's an opportunity in a way, and I know that you mentioned that before, but to really seize that and look at it hard. Because, we will be working and practicing, I think, and I guess I'll ask you to have your thoughts on that as well, in a very different way when we're on the other side of this, or what John Paulson has referred to as AC after COVID-19. We will be in a very different place.
Look, Terri, I think in terms of that scenario planning, I think, don't lose sight of those staff that you may want to retain but who may not be busy for whatever reason, and you can retain them. So again, that whole project piece and working on projects, I think, is really important. Ironically, again, I think, working from home, as I quite rightly highlighted, has its challenges, particularly for those people who do have small children at home. But I think the other thing is working from home, I know I've found I sort of tend to have, you can manage your day better. I tend to be busier, which kind of is ironic in many sense of the word, because you think, in terms of with people, you always get interruptions. But I think there's a whole opportunity whilst we are working from home to focus on some of those tech projects to implement. So I wouldn't lose sight of that. Again, I think many of us have rolled out programs fairly quickly, and it's again how you ensure that the take up of those programs is pushed out across the entire firm. So like for argument's sake, we've been trialling Microsoft Teams in one particular team up until 3 weeks ago, and then 3 weeks ago we flicked on the switch and everyone had Microsoft Teams. Even working through products like electronic signatures, etc. We've been involved in a couple of deals where we've sort of taken guidance from the OSR around transactions, etc. And again, implementing some of those changes, they're going to stick forever now, Terri.
There's going to be some massive legislative changes.
I get super excited about that stuff. Okay. And again, I think, it's important that you invest the time now, because things like electronic signatures for certain transactions are now going to be part of the norm and are not going to go away. So it's how you make it easy for your clients, how you make it seamless for you and your staff, and ensuring that everyone understands what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And again, like everything, there's ways and means of doing that. And I think, ironically, many of the vendors out there would be super excited to take a phone call from a firm to say, hey, can you help me implement this? Or I'm thinking about this. Can we trial this for a month or whatever? Now is a great time to get those free months trial type scenarios and give it a crack in terms of the current environment that we're working in. So, you kind of look at this as it really could be a negative time, but because we've been all forced into this, including the courts, we've all got that opportunity to come out of this, I think, doing stuff differently, and that different will stick.
Absolutely. And that, I think, is going to be, in some respects, our biggest challenge and our biggest opportunity, is to sustain that innovative mindset and creativity that people have had to bring to bear in so many different respects here.
Yeah, well, and, you think about, they talk about, world wars, bringing in, so much innovation, because you've got to get creative. Now, whilst we're not physically at a war, everyone's, some governments around the globe talk about it, we're on a war footing. I think that whole sense of urgency throws not necessarily caution to the wind, but again, we've got to do stuff. And in order to keep the wheels of justice turning, the courts have had to do stuff. So again, even doing what we're doing today, once upon a time, I would have been sitting around a board table with you, and you would have had this conversation with me with, 20 other people in the room. But today we're doing it via Zoom. I don't know how many Zoom conferences I've had in the last 4 weeks. Again, I think this will become part of the norm. And again, it's how you embed that and how you engage this with your team, and most importantly, how you do it with your clients. Because keep in mind, the clients are operating this way as well. So I've sort of said to my team, guys, don't pick up the telephone. Send them a team request or send them a Zoom request, and have that VC. So again, I think, the way in which we operate is going to change forever. It's just how much of it's going to stick, I think, will be the interesting thing, as you say, AC after COVID. But again, if this continues on like I think it will for 6 months, I think a lot of this will stick, Terri.
Yeah, and how important the things are that we've been talking about today, to kind of consider all of those bits and pieces in that scenario planning and also in the financial modelling. Warrick, thanks so much for answering many questions today, and being so, candid with your responses. Really, really appreciate that. I mentioned at the beginning that this will be a video and a podcast, and we hope that if you'd like to come back and revisit any parts of this or share it with colleagues, that you'll be able to do that. If you're interested in the other webinars and podcasts in this Reinvent Legal Business series from the Centre, please do visit our website or visit our site on LinkedIn, Facebook, or we also are on Twitter. Thank you very much for everyone today for coming along and listening to this. It's been a pleasure to spend the time with you. And Warrick, again, we're definitely indebted to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time today.
Thanks for having us, Terri. Thank you.
Bye.